She had been on the run for 4 months before she stopped counting the days. Counting days meant keeping track of how far Harlan Crest's reach extended, and she had learned somewhere between the stage depot in Abilene and the lonely stretch of road outside Santa Rosa that measuring a powerful man's reach was a way of shrinking yourself to fit inside his shadow. She was done shrinking. She had been done with it since the night in November when she had stood in the cold parlor of the house she shared with her husband and read the letter he left behind and understood with the particular clarity that comes only when there is nothing left to understand incorrectly exactly how she had spent the last 3 years of her life. Her name was Cora Hatch. She had been Cora Sennett for those 3 years, wife of Douglas Sennett of Beaumont, Texas land attorney and partner to the most corrupt county commissioner in the Eastern Territories. But Douglas was dead now, 2 months in the ground, and the name she wore had become a thing that could get her killed, so she had gone back to Hatch the way a woman goes back to a coat she knows fits. The letter had been tucked inside the false bottom of Douglas's desk. She had found it on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the funeral, when she was clearing his papers with the methodical patience of a woman who has nothing left to do but be thorough. It was addressed to her in Douglas's hand, careful as a deed filing underlined twice. She had read it by lamplight with the parlor door locked and the derringer from the top drawer pressed against her thigh. He had known about Harlan Crest for 2 years. He had known that the Settlers' Land Compensation Fund, the fund that was supposed to reimburse homesteaders dispossessed by the railroad expansion, had been gutted. $180,000 siphoned across 6 years by a man whose name appeared on the dedication plaques of 2 Beaumont schoolhouses and whose photograph hung in the county courthouse. He had known, and he had said nothing, and he had been ashamed of the nothing, and he had spent those 2 years gathering what proof he could manage and putting it in the letter, and then dying of a fever that Cora no longer believed was a fever. The letter named names. It listed dates. It described in the precise language of a man who understood exactly how legal documents function, the mechanism by which Harlan Crest had stolen from people who had already lost everything once. It also said, "I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I am sorry I was not the man you believed I was. You are the most capable person I have ever known. I hope this gives you something useful. I hope it gives you room to breathe." She had started packing before dawn. Now she was in New Mexico territory on a hired buckboard north of the town of Calabra Flats, watching red country open up around her in the late December light, with the letter and its accompanying documents sealed in an oilskin pouch inside her traveling case, and a Colt Navy revolver she had taken from Douglas's study resting under her skirt against her boot top. The advertisement had reached her in Tucson. She had been reading the notice columns of every newspaper she could acquire for 3 months, looking for anything that told her where a woman alone with a dangerous case could land without landing somewhere worse. Most advertisements for wives read like a man describing useful livestock. This one did not. Rancher in northern New Mexico territory, 40 years old widower with 1 son of 9. Needs a capable woman, not a decorative one. Water rights dispute is ongoing. Ranch is functional but wants management. Offer honest arrangement, fair treatment, and no pretense about what this is or what it requires. Letters responded to promptly. J.W. Caslin, Garnet Creek Station. She had read it 4 times. Then she had not written a letter. She had bought a stage ticket because writing letters created records, and records could be traced, and she had been running too long to start leaving a trail now. The buckboard driver, a weathered Mexican man named Florentino, who had not asked her a single question since Mesa Verde Junction, pointed north as they came over a low rise. "Garnet Creek," he said. "That ranch down there." She looked. It sat in the fold between 2 red ridgelines, a main house of adobe and salvaged timber, a substantial barn, 3 outbuildings positioned with the practical geometry of a man who had thought carefully about the relationship between labor and distance. A windmill, a good-sized corral with horses moving in the late light. Fencing that looked new at the east boundary and old, but maintained everywhere else. Not prosperous, not struggling either. Something in between that had more to do with stubbornness than luck. She had sold the Beaumont house, the furniture, the silver, and the match bay horses Douglas had loved. She had $312 in coins sewn into the lining of her traveling coat, and a case of documents that could put Harlan Crest in a federal prison and quite possibly the chair. She had a borrowed name and a dead husband's apology, and a plan that extended as far as get inside that house and figure out the rest. Florentino drew up at the gate. She climbed down, paid him what was fair and a little more, and walked toward the front door with her case under one arm and her carpet bag in the other hand, and her back straight in the way of a woman who has decided that fear is a luxury she cannot currently afford. She was 3 strides from the porch when the door opened. The man who filled the doorway was not what she had assembled from the advertisement. She had built a rough picture from the facts 40 rancher widower. She had expected closed and weary the specific damage of a man who has taken losses and organized whatever remains around work and land and the reliable demands of animals. How was all of that? He was also a man who looked at her with immediate complete attention, not the appraising look of a man pricing livestock, but the particular alertness of someone who has been alone long enough that the arrival of another person reads like a change in weather. He was lean and dark-haired and had the kind of stillness that comes from years of reading country rather than people. His hands were at his sides. His face showed nothing she could name except that it was not closed to her. "Mrs. Hatch," he said. "Mr. Caslin." She stopped at the foot of the steps. "I apologize for arriving without proper notice. I thought it was better to come than to write." Something moved briefly in his expression. "Come in," he said, and stepped back from the door. The interior of the house told her a great deal inside the first 60 seconds. No unnecessary objects, no clutter, and no decorative ambition, but not stripped bare either. The kitchen was large and functional and smelled of coffee and pine smoke. The furniture was plain and solid, everything built or chosen to last rather than to impress. A pair of child-sized boots sat by the back door with the dried mud of a serious day's work still on them. On the kitchen table, 3 survey maps had been spread and weighted at the corners, with a coffee cup and a horseshoe nail. She set her carpet bag down. She looked at the survey maps. She could not help it. "May I?" she said. He hesitated 1/2 second. "Go ahead." She set her traveling case on the chair and leaned over the maps. The survey notation was a system she recognized from watching her father work deed disputes across 15 years in Oklahoma Territory, the shorthand of a man trying to establish exactly where one piece of ground ended and another began. "The water source dispute," she said. "Yes." He came to stand at the other side of the table watching her. "The Crane family claims their original grant covers the spring on the east edge of my North Range. I say the spring is mine under my 48 purchase. The territory court ruled in their favor 8 months ago." "What court?" He looked at her. "Territorial circuit." "Who sits that circuit?" "Judge Wallace Renner." The name touched something in her memory. She pressed her fingertip to the survey notation without looking up. "Is Renner's court one of the courts that hears compensation fund disputes?" A silence. "Yes," he said. "How do you know about the compensation fund?" She straightened and looked at him. "I should tell you something," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm tired and I would like to know where I'm sleeping. But soon. It matters." He regarded her for the long moment, with the specific directness of a man who has spent his life reading weather and terrain and has now been asked to read something considerably more complicated. "Room at the end of the hall," he said. "East facing. It's small." "Small is fine," she said. She took her carpet bag. She did not take the traveling case. She left it on the chair and watched from the corner of her eye as she walked toward the hall, and she saw him look at it and then very deliberately look away, and she thought, all right, that is something. The boy's name was Eli. She met him the next morning at breakfast, 9 years old, sandy-haired, with the serious face of a child who has been the only young person in a household of careful adults and has learned to carry that weight without complaining about it. He looked at her the way intelligent children look at new information, thoroughly and without pretense, filing what he found without committing to a verdict. "You're the woman from the advertisement," he said. "I am." She set a plate in front of him. "I'm Cora. Papa says you're from Oklahoma Territory." "My father was, yes. I lived there until I was grown." "Can you ride?" "I can." He looked at her with the careful assessment of a child who has lived his whole life on a horse ranch and considers this the primary metric of a person's usefulness. "Papa says most women who answer advertisements can't ride." "Your father is probably right about most women who answer advertisements." She sat across from him with her coffee. "I'm not most women." Eli considered this, found it satisfactory, and returned to his biscuit with the thoroughness of someone who has made a preliminary judgment and is comfortable with it. James Caslin was in the doorway. She had not heard him come in. He was looking at his son with an expression she had not expected on a face she was still learning to read. Love of the unperformed variety, the kind that has no audience and makes no calculation. Simply present the way a fire is present in a room that needs warmth. She looked away before he noticed her noticing. 3 days passed before she told him. She spent those days learning the geography of the Caslin property, the way she had learned to read anything that mattered carefully from the outside inward, establishing the perimeter before touching the interior. The ranch was better managed than she had initially understood, and more precarious than it appeared from the road. The water rights dispute had been bleeding it for 7 years. James had adjusted his entire operation around the contested North Spring, keeping his herd smaller than the grass could support, running his irrigation from the South Creek, which ran unreliably in dry years, avoiding the East Meadow that his North Range could have fed year-round. She found the survey discrepancy on the second day. She had spread the territorial filings across the kitchen table while James was working the south fence and Eli was at the schoolhouse in Calabra Flats, and she went through them with the patient methodology her father had drilled into her across years of watching him untangle competing claims in Oklahoma. What she found was quiet but unmistakable: a filing date on the Crane water easement that did not match the territorial register from that year. The notation was in a different hand from the rest of the document, slightly heavier ink added after the original submission. Someone had altered the filing. She made her notes, carefully folded the maps along their original creases, and returned everything to its place. She had learned from Douglas's slow and too late collection of evidence that the value of a thread is entirely in how carefully you follow it. That evening, after Eli was in bed, she sat across from James at the kitchen table and told him about Douglas. She told it straight, the way her father had told difficult things, in order without embellishment, stating what she knew and what she suspected and keeping them distinct. She told him about the fund, about Harlan Crest, about the oilskin pouch in her traveling case. She told him she had been running for 4 months and that she had come here because she needed to be somewhere with a legitimate reason to be there, and somewhere Harlan wouldn't look immediately. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet for a long time. "You came here to hide," he said. "I came here to stop running long enough to think," she said. "There's a difference." Another pause. "The man in your case," he said. "Harlan Crest." "Yes." "You think he's connected to the Crane claim?" She looked at him steadily. "The survey discrepancy I found today is the same method Douglas described in his letter. Altered filings, adjusted dates. It's a signature and it matches." She pressed her hand flat on the table. "I don't know yet if the Crane family knows they're being used, but someone altered that filing, and whoever benefits from your water dispute also benefits from the compensation fund fraud, and both of those threads run toward the same territorial court." James was quiet for a long time. "How dangerous are you to the people who are looking for you?" he said. She thought about Harlan Crest, about his composed, pleasant face and his banker's manners, and the fact that 3 men with documented knowledge of the fund fraud had died in the past 18 months. "Enough that they sent someone after me," she said. "I spotted a man following me in Tucson. I haven't seen him since Santa Rosa, but that could mean I lost him, or it could mean he stopped following and started asking ahead." James looked at his hands on the table, at the survey maps between them. "You should have told me before you came," he said. "Yes," she said. "But you didn't, because you needed somewhere to land before you could trust anyone with the whole of it." She met his eyes. "Yes." He was quiet for a full minute. She counted the ticks of the clock above the stove and said nothing. She had learned the value of letting silence complete itself. He picked up the survey map. "Tell me about the filing discrepancy," he said. "Start from the beginning," she told him. He listened the way she was coming to understand. He listened to everything completely, without preparation, without filling space with his own noise. When she finished, he asked 3 precise questions about the notation system, and she answered them, and she watched the moment when the information became real to him, the small shift in his jaw and the stillness of a man absorbing something that reorders his understanding of 7 years of his own life. "7 years," he said. "Yes." He folded the map. "I have a contact in Albuquerque," he said. "A federal land attorney named Pritchard. He's been recommended to me by the only man in Calabra Flats I trust completely. If this goes where you think it goes, Pritchard is who needs to see it." She had not expected this. The speed of it, the clean, practical turn from listening to action. "I've been trying to get documentation to the federal level since January," she said. "The difficulty is doing it before Harlan's lawyers file something to block it." "Then we move carefully, and we move soon," he said. It was not a performance of decisiveness. It was a man who had made decisions on hard ground for 20 years and knew the difference between moving fast and moving correctly. "How much of what you have in that case is provable versus suggestive?" "The provable portion is substantial," she said. What Douglas gathered alone would start a case. What I've added in 4 months of running and reading and corresponding with his former clerk in Beaumont would likely finish one. James looked at the traveling case on the shelf where she had set it 3 days ago, and left it, and she saw the same deliberate restraint she had observed on her first evening, a man who had looked at something belonging to her and chosen not to touch it. There's something else, she said. In Tucson before I left, I sent copies of the core documents to two separate contacts, one in Oklahoma, one in El Paso. If anything happens to the originals, the case doesn't die with them. He looked at her. You did that before you knew if you could trust anyone here, he said. I did that because I learned from watching my husband wait too long, she said. He died with the information still only in his possession. I decided I would not make that mistake. Something shifted in his expression. Not the almost smile she was beginning to learn, but something deeper. The recognition a person makes when they see a quality they understand from the inside. That was the right call, he said. I know, she said. They sat at the kitchen table for another hour, talking about the practical architecture of what came next. James listened to all of it and asked questions only when the questions added something, and she found, without quite meaning to find it, that this was the most honest conversation she had been inside in 3 years. When she stood to go to bed, she paused at the doorway. James, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He looked up from the survey map. Thank you for not asking me to leave, she said. He held her gaze for a moment with the steadiness she was beginning to associate with him. The way she associated certain smells with certain places, it was simply what he was. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we start on the filing dates. The days that followed had a quality she had not experienced in 4 years. Not safety, she was not foolish enough to call it safety, but the specific quality of two people engaged in genuine shared work, which is its own form of trust, built not by declaration, but by accumulation. She learned that James made decisions the way he read survey maps from the edges in establishing the perimeter of a problem before approaching its center. She learned that Eli hummed the same 3 bars of something unnamed while he cleaned tack, always stopping before the resolution as if the unfinished melody was more interesting than the complete one. She learned that James tracked her movements through the house and adjusted his own to give her room, not performance of courtesy, but the actual thing, the habit of a man who has learned that space given freely is worth more than space taken. She learned the small archaeology of the place, the way the barn door stuck in wet weather and needed a particular lift and pull that nobody had written down anywhere but that everyone who used it knew. The particular angle of the afternoon light through the east window that made the kitchen warm in a way the stove alone couldn't account for. The fact that Eli kept a locked journal under the floorboard beside his bed, which she knew because she had heard the particular sound of it being opened and closed, and had never once indicated that she knew. On the 4th day, they rode the north boundary together. James showed her where the spring ran down from the upper formation, and where the crane fence line had been moved 3 years ago, 2 posts east of where the original survey markers stood. She examined the markers while he held the horses, and she found what she had expected to find. The original stakes were still there, partially buried the survey notation on them, a different system than the one in the altered filing. The original markers used the Oklahoma notation system, she said. He looked at her. Meaning what? Meaning the man who surveyed this property originally trained in Oklahoma, and the notation in the altered crane filing uses a Texas system. She brushed red dirt from the stake. The same man did not write both documents. James was quiet for a moment, looking at the spring. Water came down from the upper formation in a clean, cold line, and the grass along its bank was thick and green even in December, and she understood, looking at it, why 7 years of losing access to this had cost him what it had cost him. That meadow back there, she said, nodding east. You haven't used it. No, he said. Didn't feel right to build on something I might lose. She looked at the meadow. Good grass, substantial cottonwoods stand along the water edge room for twice his current herd. 8 years of productive land sitting idle because a fraudulent filing had made him afraid to invest in it. She felt a clean, specific anger on his behalf that she did not particularly try to manage. When this is resolved, she said, that meadow is worth 2 additional breeding operations. He looked at her sideways. When, she said. Something in his expression shifted 1 degree, the way a door shifts when you press it and find it is not locked. On the 9th day, the stranger appeared in Calabria Flats. She saw him from the window of the general store, and she knew him the way you know a thing you have been watching for in the dark, not because you can see it clearly, but because the shape of it is already memorized. Medium build, long dark coat. The particular stillness of a man whose job was watching standing at the far end of the street, not reading the notice board he appeared to be reading. She had seen him twice. Once outside Douglas's office in Beaumont in October, and once outside a boarding house in Santa Rosa, where she had stayed 2 nights under the name Marsh. She paid for her thread and walked out without running, which was more difficult than it had any right to be, and crossed to where James was loading grain at the wagon. "I need to go back," she said quietly. "Now." He looked at her face and did not ask questions. They were rolling north inside 8 minutes. She told him about the man on the ride back. He listened without speaking. When she finished, he said, "Does he know where you are?" "I don't know. If he traced me to Calabria, he'll ask at the livery in the hotel. Someone will mention the buckboard higher north." She pressed her hand to the case in her lap. "We have time, but not much of it." James pulled up on a rise above the ranch and looked down at it. She had seen him do this before, the specific stillness of a man locating himself in relation to what matters to him. "Pritchard in Albuquerque," he said. "My contact Sandoval rides up that way twice a month. He leaves in 4 days." "That's enough time to prepare a full package," she said, "if I work through the next 3 nights." He looked at the ranch, then at her. "You've been alone with this for 4 months," he said. "You don't have to be alone with it anymore." She looked at him, at the weathered, careful face of a man who had said the most important thing plainly without theater, the way he did everything. "I know," she said. "It's going to take some time to believe it." "Take all the time you need," he said, and picked up the reins. She worked through 3 nights, and James worked beside her for 2 of them. He was not a legal reader by training, but he was a precise and patient man, and she taught him the document system as they went, the way her father had taught her, not lecturing, but working in parallel, side by side, at the kitchen table with the lamp turned high, and the desert quiet, and the oilskin pouch open between them. He found 2 discrepancies she had missed. One was minor, one was not. In a set of account transfers Douglas had compiled from the compensation fund ledger, a notation that Cora had read as an internal transfer turned out, when James examined it with the surveyor's habit of checking how distances added up, to be an external payment routed through a shell entity, with a name that appeared nowhere in Douglas's correspondence, but appeared 3 times in the Crane family's territorial filings. "There," he said, setting his finger on it. She leaned over and read it and felt the specific cold clarity of a thread becoming a rope. "That's the connection," she said. "That's the same money moving through the same structure. The compensation fund fraud and the water rights fraud are not separate schemes. They're the same scheme." James looked at the table. "Harlan Cress doesn't just steal from displaced homesteaders. He also corrupts the courts that could stop him." "Yes," she said. "And when Wallace Renner ruled against you, he was working from an altered filing that was paid for by the same money." He was quiet for a long time. "I paid a lawyer $340 to appeal that ruling," he said. "A man out of Santa Fe who had been recommended by someone I trusted. He filed something and then wrote me to say the appeal had been denied." He looked at his hands. "I found out 6 months later that his appeal filing was incomplete, missing 3 key documents, poorly argued, like it had been written to fail." "He was bought before he came to see you," she said. "Yes," he said, without self-pity, without anger, in the flat declarative way of a man stating a weather fact. "I trusted a recommendation and didn't check the man himself. That's not like me." "Harlan creates that," she said. "The urgency, the crisis, the sense that you need to move faster than you have time to be careful. It's part of the method." He looked at her across the table. "Was it part of the method with Douglas?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Different versions," she said. "Douglas was close enough to see the whole operation. Harlan didn't need urgency with him because he had the inside view. What Harlan used with Douglas was patience, the slow, quiet certainty that anyone who knew what Douglas knew would eventually have to choose talk or disappear." She looked at the lamp. "Douglas chose wrong for 2 years. He was trying to find a version where he could come out with clean hands." She paused. "There wasn't one. There never is with a man like Harlan." "And you," James said. "I had 3 weeks from the letter to the road," she said. "I didn't try to find a version with clean hands. I tried to find a version that was survivable." He looked at her steadily. "Are they the same here?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think they might be," she said. "That's what I'm working toward." Sandoval left for Albuquerque on a Wednesday morning before first light with a sealed oilskin packet bound to his chest under his coat, and specific verbal instructions that he had listened to without writing down and had repeated back to her without missing a word. She stood in the yard and watched him ride north until the dark took him. James came and stood beside her. "He'll be there by Friday," he said. "Pritchard reads fast." "I know." She looked at the cold sky. "Even so, Harlan is going to find me before Pritchard moves." "Probably," he said. "When he comes." "He'll come here," James said. "He'll know by now you're on this property." "When he comes," she said again firmly, "I want you to know what I intend to do." He turned to look at her. "I'm not going to let him use this ranch as a lever," she said. "Not the water rights, not Eli, not anything here. If he arrives before the federal warrant, I'll face him in the yard and tell him directly that everything is already in Pritchard's hands and there is nothing left to prevent. That the only thing remaining is the process completing itself." She paused. "I've been afraid of Harlan Crest for 4 months. I'm finished with it." James was quiet for a moment. "You're not doing that alone," he said. "James, I'm not going to argue it," he said. He said it without heat, the way he said things that were simply decided. "You've been carrying this by yourself since November. I understand why. I understand what the last 4 months cost you and what it cost you to walk through that door. But you're here now, and this is my property, and that man is coming to it, and I'll be standing beside you when he does." She looked at him. "I was not performing this." He was not making a declaration for its own sake. He was stating a fact the way he stated all facts directly, without ornamentation, meaning every word. "I'm not accustomed to that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." She looked at the dark northern road. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and went inside, and she stood a moment longer in the cold morning and thought about what it felt like to not be alone on the wrong side of a difficult thing, and found that she did not yet have language for it, only the feeling itself, which was considerable. Eli knew something was coming. He was 9 years old, and he had his father's specific gift for reading rooms, and he had spent 3 weeks watching Cora with the thoroughness of a child who files everything and says nothing until he has decided what it means. On the night before Harlan's man was expected in Calabra Flats, he appeared in the kitchen doorway in his nightshirt, with his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was preparing to ask something he was not entirely sure was permitted. "Is something bad going to happen?" he said. Cora set down her pen. She thought about the 4 years she had spent in a house where difficult questions received smooth, untrue answers, and how the untrue answers had not protected her from anything, only from knowing in time to do something about it. "A difficult man is coming who will try to make trouble," she said. "Your father and I are ready for him, and he will not succeed, but I won't pretend it isn't happening." Eli stood in the doorway and absorbed this with the organized seriousness he applied to everything. "Is he the one you ran from?" he said. "Yes." "You're not running anymore." "No," she said. "I'm done running." He thought about this. "What do we do?" he said. She noted the "we" without remarking on it. "You go to school tomorrow," she said. "You have your arithmetic examination." His expression shifted fractionally. "That's not what I meant." "I know," she said. "The most important thing you can do is let the people who are handling it handle it. You being at school safe is what I need from you." He stood for another moment. "Cora," he said. "Yes." "He's not going to win," he said, the flat certainty of his father's voice in a 9-year-old throat. "I know he's not." "He's not," she said. Eli went to bed. She sat for a long time after looking at the lamp, thinking about a 9-year-old boy who had lost his mother to circumstances. James had not yet fully explained and had organized his whole interior life around his father and the work of the ranch, and was now without any formal announcement, including her in the architecture of what he was willing to stand up for. She had not expected to be claimed like that. She understood now that she had wanted it without knowing she wanted it. Ma'am. Harlan Crest arrived on a Friday afternoon. He came with 2 men she did not know, and one she did, the man in the long dark coat from Tucson, from Santa Rosa, from the edge of the street in Calabra Flats. He came on a gray horse and wore a good suit and looked exactly as he had always looked, composed, pleasant, the particular warmth of a man whose pleasantness is a calculated weapon. She was in the yard when they rode through the gate. James was at the corral. He had been there when she came out, and he did not move toward her, but stayed where he was, equidistant between her and the riders, in the specific quality of stillness that is its own form of statement. Not threatening, present, ready. Eli was at school. She had confirmed this twice. "Cora," Harlan said. He said her name the way a concerned relative uses a name warm and sorrowful and precisely calculated for effect. There you are finally. We have all been so worried. Harlan, she said. She had rehearsed this. She had stood at the east window the night before in the dark and said what she was going to say out loud alone, until the words stopped feeling like something she was borrowing and started feeling like something that belonged to her. She had his face in her mind when she said it. She had imagined his composure and his calculation, and she had felt the fear that 4 months of running had built into her, and she had held it, and she had let it complete itself, and then she had put it away. She was not afraid of him now. I've come to help you get settled, he said. This arrangement, this ranch, whatever it was you needed to do after Douglas's death, nobody blames you. Grief makes people do things they wouldn't ordinarily consider. Let me take you home. Home, she said pleasantly. Back to Beaumont. Back to people who know you. Back to a place where you can manage me more easily, she said. His eyes went briefly flat. The warmth recalculated. Cora, the compensation fund documentation is in Albuquerque, she said. It arrived Thursday morning. Federal Attorney Pritchard has the full account, the disbursement records, the shell entity transfers, the payment relationship between your office and the Crane family's territorial filings. He also has the survey analysis showing the altered easement dates. She watched his face the way she had watched Douglas read difficult letters, looking for the moment the calculation changed. He was given two independent collections of evidence compiled by two separate people who had no contact with each other. They say the same things, they name the same names, they list the same amounts. Harlan had gone very still on his gray horse. That's a serious claim, he said. The warmth was gone entirely. What remained was the thing underneath it, the voice of a man who has never once been caught at anything and is calculating whether he still is not. It is, she agreed. Pritchard found it credible enough to open a federal case yesterday afternoon. I received confirmation this morning by Ryder from Calabra Flats. She reached into her coat pocket and produced the telegram, held it up briefly, returned it to her pocket. The case is open. It is in federal hands. You cannot close it from here. He looked at James. The specific assessment of a man identifying levers. Your water rights dispute, he said, shifting registers businessman now reasonable. The Crane easement ruling. There may be room for accommodation. The enforcement timeline is flexible, and a man in your position operating a ranch of this scale surely values a stable relationship with the territorial. The easement was fraudulently altered, James said. His voice was entirely even. The territorial surveyor confirmed the discrepancy in the original stakes 2 weeks ago. The documentation of that alteration is part of what Pritchard received. He looked at Harlan the way he looked at things he was assessing directly without rush. I expect the circuit ruling to be vacated when the federal case resolves, but I'm not waiting on that. I'm riding my North Range this spring regardless. Harlan's pleasant face had become something else entirely. Cora watched him the way she had learned to watch powerful men, not at their faces, which were managed, but at their hands. His hands tightened on the reins once briefly, and then released. A man recalculating his options and finding them fewer than expected. You're making a mistake, he said. The warmth was entirely gone now. The voice was flat and cold and very precise. Both of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have a very thorough idea, Cora said. I've spent 4 months reading Douglas's documentation of exactly who you are and how you operate. I know the methods, I know the names, I know the amounts. She looked at him steadily. And I know that you are standing in a yard in northern New Mexico territory, and the federal case is already open in Albuquerque, and there is nothing left for you to prevent. A long silence. The afternoon was cold and bright, the red mesa wall behind the house going dark at its rim as the sun moved west. The windmill turned in the December air. The horses in the corral moved with the particular unconcern of animals who have not yet understood what tension is. Harlan looked at her. She looked back. She thought about the parlor in Beaumont in November, standing alone with the lamp and the letter and the specific cold clarity of a woman who has nothing left to lose. She thought about the Tucson stage platform and 2 men who had tried to take her case and had found that she would not be taken from. She thought about 4 months of running counting days, eating fear for breakfast, and calling it caution. She was done with all of that. She was standing on red earth in a yard that was becoming hers, beside a man who had stood beside her without being asked to, in front of the thing she had been running from for 4 months, and she was not running. She was simply here. This is finished, she thought. Not the legal case, not the proceedings, not the years of appeals and filings that Pritchard had already warned her about. But this specific confrontation, this ends today. Harlan held her gaze for a long moment. Then without a word he turned his horse. His two men followed. The man in the dark coat was last. He looked at her as he turned, and in his face she saw something she had not expected. Not malice, but the particular expression of a man who has been doing a job and has recognized that the job has changed, that the person he was hired to pressure is no longer pressurable, and that continuing to try is a waste of everyone's time. He turned his horse and they rode out through the gate. She stood in the yard and breathed. James came to stand beside her. He did not touch her. He was simply there, the way he was always simply there, without ceremony or announcement. He'll appeal every finding, she said. Probably, he said. It will take years to fully resolve. Probably, he said again. This is not over. No. He was quiet for a moment. But today it's over. She looked at the gate where the gray horse had been. Today it's over, she said. Eli appeared on the path from the road, his school satchel bouncing, arriving at a dead run that transitioned smoothly to a walk when he was close enough to see their faces and read what he saw there. He stopped in front of them. Did he come? He said. He came, James said. And he left, Cora said. Eli looked from his father to Cora and back, performing the same thorough assessment he applied to everything important in his life. Good, he said with the flat finality of his father's voice, and walked inside. In the days after Harlan's departure, the house settled into a new configuration. Not peace, not exactly. She knew better than to call it peace. The federal case was open and would move slowly, and Harlan had connections in Washington, and Pritchard had already written to warn her that appeals were likely and patience was required. She filed this information under things she knew and got up the next morning and did what the morning required. What changed was smaller and larger than peace. It was the particular quality of a household that has been holding its breath for a long time and has finally carefully permitted itself to exhale. Eli started doing his schoolwork at the kitchen table instead of retreating to his room. James checked the north fence 3 days in a row and came back each time with specific plans for the spring work on the east meadow. Cora began corresponding directly with Pritchard, no longer through intermediaries writing in her own name from this address, because there was no longer any reason to disguise where she was. She was here. She had chosen to be here. She was done with arrangements that required disguise. Pritchard wrote in January with the first of several updates. The Territorial Jurisdiction Review had suspended the circuit's authority over certain compensation fund matters pending investigation. The crane easement enforcement was in immediate limbo. The territorial surveyor's finding was in the case record. She read the letter at the kitchen table and told James that evening. I was quiet for a moment after she finished. The East Meadow, he said. Yes, I want to start the fence work in February. He looked at his coffee. I've been planning around that constraint for 8 years. I want to stop planning around it. Delgado's available in February, she said. I already asked. He looked up at her. You already asked. I wanted to know if it was practical before I brought it up, she said. Something moved in his expression. The thing she had been trying to find the exact word for since December. She had finally settled on it, the expression of a man who had been alone for a long time and had discovered without quite planning for it that he was not alone anymore and who was finding the discovery entirely good. One evening in late January, James pushed back from the kitchen table and said without preamble, I want to tell you something about Eli's mother. She set down her pen. Her name was Nora, he said. Nora Caslin. She came west with me in '71 after the war when I was 30 and certain about everything. I built this ranch because building was what I knew how to do, and I believed that doing it well enough would be sufficient. He looked at his hands. It wasn't. The country was wrong for her from the first winter. She needed noise and people and something happening that wasn't wind and cattle and the same 40 miles in every direction. I kept building things because building was how I showed I meant to stay. He paused. She left when Eli was 3. She went back to Missouri. She's alive. She remarried. Eli has 2 half-sisters he doesn't know about. When are you going to tell him? Cora said. I've been telling myself I was protecting him, he said. I think the truth is I was ashamed. I told the people she died because I didn't know how to say that. She looked at everything I'd built and found it not enough. He was quiet for a moment. I should have understood what she needed before I asked her to come here. I understood it eventually, and by then she was already gone, and I was already alone with a 3-year-old child and a ranch, and the knowledge that I had built around the wrong thing. She looked at him. What was the wrong thing, she said. The building itself, he said. I thought if I built something solid enough, she would come to love it. I didn't understand that love doesn't follow solid things. It follows being seen. He met her eyes. She didn't feel seen here. I didn't know how to see her properly. I didn't understand until she was gone that seeing a person is the most important thing you can offer them. The kitchen was quiet. The stove ticked. Outside, the January wind moved off the mesa. You're telling me this, she said carefully, because you want to tell Eli. I'm telling you this, he said, because I have been telling myself I'm not ready to tell you, and I think what I'm actually afraid of is that you'll hear it and find it sufficient reason to go. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Douglas, about the careful management of what she was permitted to know and permitted to want and permitted to be. About 4 years of a smaller world calibrated to another person's requirements. She thought about what it meant that James Caslin had just told her the most shameful thing in his history and offered it without defense, without packaging as simply what was true. I'm not going, she said. He held her gaze. You don't have to decide that tonight. I've decided it, she said. Not because of the practical arrangement and not because I have nowhere else to go, because I do have somewhere else to go. I have a contact in El Paso who has offered me a position and sufficient funds to start over. I'm not going because I don't want to. She looked at the lamp between them. I have spent 4 years in a marriage where I was considered capable in the abstract and managed in the particular. I came here expecting something similar and found something entirely different. You see me when you look at me. You see what's actually there. She paused. I haven't been seen in a very long time. I'm not going to walk away from it. I was quiet for a full minute. I'm not easy to be with, he said. I know that. I'm slow and I manage myself too thoroughly, and I'm not quick with words or demonstrations. I know you're not quick, she said. I've been watching you manage yourself since December. It is one of the most consistent things about you. She met his eyes. Slow is what I need. Slow is what I know how to trust. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and set his hand over hers, simply directly the way he did everything, without theater meaning it entirely. All right, he said. All right, she said. They sat in the warm kitchen with the lamp between them and the wind off the mesa and the cold, brilliant January stars above the red country, and outside the windmill turned in the dark and the horses shifted in the corral and the east meadow waited in the darkness to the north full of possibility and new grass and 8 years of patient growth. It was enough. It was exactly enough. The formal federal charges against Harlan Crest were filed on a Tuesday in early April. 14 counts: fraud, bribery, misappropriation of public funds, conspiracy to falsify territorial court documents, and the corruption of 2 judicial appointments across 2 territories. Each count documented with the specific, meticulous precision of 2 people who had understood from the beginning that a case built on incomplete records is worse than no case at all. Pritchard wrote that the documentation was the most organized evidentiary package he had seen in 18 years of federal practice. She read that line twice and thought about Douglas at his desk in November, working carefully and precisely and too late, and she held the feeling that came with it, which was not grief and not relief, but something that contained both and extended beyond them. And then she folded the letter and filed it and went back to work. Brannock, the county sheriff, came to the ranch the next morning. He stood at the gate with his hat in his hands and told her that the territorial court's water rights ruling was under formal review, that the Crane enforcement had been vacated pending the federal case, and that any future dispute over Garnet Creek water would go through a court that did not answer to Wallace Renner. He said, "You did something considerable here, Mrs. Hatch. I want you to know I understand that." She said, "Several people did something considerable. I had help." He went. She stood in the April yard and looked at the outbuildings and the corral and the windmill turning in the morning air, and the sage coming in fierce and bright green along the breaks trail. The air smelled like water and something she had been trying to name for weeks. She named it now, the specific smell of a thing becoming possible. She went inside. James talked to Eli on a Friday evening. Cora was in her room with the door not quite closed. She could hear the rhythm of it, not the words, but the quality, James's voice low and careful. The specific sound of a man saying a true thing he has avoided for a long time. Eli's responses less frequent than usual, which meant he was listening more than talking. It went on for 25 minutes. Then Eli's door closed and the kitchen produced the sounds of a man who needs something to do with his hands. The coffee pot moved, the stove lid open. Cora gave him 10 minutes. He was at the table when she came in, turning his coffee cup in his hands, looking north toward the breaks. How did he take it? She said. He said he already knew, James said. He said he'd known since he was 7. He said he'd been waiting for me to be ready to talk about it. I was protecting you, she said. I know. He set the cup down. 7 years old and managing my feelings about his own mother. Children learn what the household requires, she said. He learned you needed protection from certain things, and he provided it. That's not a failure of his. It's not a success of mine. No, she said, but it's also not a fixed fact. It happened. He knows you know it happened. That changes what comes next. She sat across from him. What did he say when you told him the whole of it? James looked up. He said, it's all right, Pa. You did the best you knew. Cora looked at the lamp. That's more grace than you gave yourself, she said. More than I deserve, he said. Children are generous beyond what their parents deserve, she said. It's one of the more remarkable things about them. He looked at her with the expression that still caught her breath fractionally, when it appeared the one where the management fell away and whatever lived underneath showed itself unguarded, present, real. Cora, he said. Yes. He asked if you were staying. What did you tell him? I told him I hope so, he said. I told him I was working on it. She held his gaze. Tell him yes, she said. Something completed itself in his expression. Yes, he said. The spring came on fast that year. The sage along the breaks went green overnight, and the cottonwoods at the east meadow boundary leafed out in the sharp silver green of new growth, and the north spring ran cold and full from the snow melt above, and the grass at the base of the meadow grew thick and deep, the way grass grows when it has been properly watered for the first time in years. They rode up on a Saturday morning, all three of them, Cora and James and Eli, on his pinto gelding. The trail to the north range was warm in the April light, the air bright and thin and clean, in the way that high desert air is clean after rain. The meadow was everything it had promised to be. Eli rode ahead to the spring and climbed down to crouch at the water's edge, his boots getting wet in the traditional fashion, and James walked the east fence line that Delgado's crew had completed in March, running his hand along the posts the way he checked everything directly, learning its actual state. Cora stood at the fence and looked south across the full sweep of the Caslin property. The ranch from here had the same quality she had seen from Florentino's buckboard in December, solid, maintained, built by someone who expected it to last. The mended fencing, the practical outbuildings, the windmill turning with the patient steadiness of a thing built for work rather than appearance. The same ranch, the same view. She was not the same person who had looked at it in December. The east fence will carry through next winter easy, James said, coming to stand beside her. Delgado's nephew does good work. He does, she said. I checked the footings last week. He looked at her. You checked the footings. I like to know the state of things. He looked back at the fence line, and the thing in his expression that she had finally found the word for was there again, the quiet, unperformed happiness of a man who is no longer alone and has not yet finished understanding how good that is. She turned to face him. She had been composing this in her head for 6 weeks, arranging and rearranging the words because she believed in precision and had learned that imprecision in important moments cost more than the discomfort of saying the true thing. But standing here in the April meadow, with the spring running cold behind her, in the enormous sky overhead, the words she had been arranging fell away entirely. What came out was simply what was true. I want you to know something, she said, not as a practical report. He waited. He was always good at waiting. I was afraid when I got off that stage in December, she said. Afraid of being wrong about you, afraid of wanting too much and losing it, afraid of making myself small again to fit inside something that didn't fit me. She met his eyes. I am not afraid of any of that anymore. I chose to be here. I am not here because I had no alternatives. I am here because this is where I want to be, and you are who I want to be beside. And I needed to say it out loud in plain language because I am done with imprecision about things that matter. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, the same direct gesture as January, no ceremony, meaning it entirely. You're more than I bargained for, he said. She laughed, quick and genuine, from somewhere she had not accessed in a very long time. James Caslin, she said, I am going to need you to do better than that. It's the best thing I know how to say, he said. Something moved in his eyes, warm and unguarded. You came here carrying evidence that could destroy a powerful man determined to run my water case and protect my son and build something on ground you'd never seen. And you did all of it without once asking for anything in return except to be allowed to stay. He held her gaze. That's more than I bargained for. That's more than I thought a life like this could contain. She looked at him. She thought about December and the stage platform and the fear that had tasted like iron every morning for 4 months. She thought about the oilskin pouch and the lamp and Douglas's handwriting and all the things the letter had not told her that she had found anyway. It contains it, she said. It contains all of it. He lifted her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips, quiet and direct, and meant entirely, and then he held on, and they stood at the fence line of the north meadow, with the spring running clean behind them, and the enormous patient April sky overhead. Eli appeared at their shoulders. If you're done, he said with the serenity of a child who has been monitoring the situation with comprehensive thoroughness, Blanco is eating the cottonwood again. James looked at his son. Which branch? He said. The low one on the north side, Eli said. The one you told him not to last spring. I did tell him that, James agreed. They walked back across the meadow, all three of them, and the horses and the April sky vast overhead, and the spring ran clear behind them, and the sage was warm in the sun, and below small and solid against the red earth. The ranch waited with its windmill turning and its east-facing window catching the afternoon light. Cora looked at it. She thought about the stage in December, and the oilskin pouch, and the letter that had been honest in every single line. She thought about everything the letter had not told her, and everything she had found anyway, and how the things she had not planned for had turned out to be the things worth keeping. She mounted her horse and turned toward home. James, she said. Yes, he said. We're going to be all right. I was quiet for a moment. He looked at the breaks and at the ranch below and at the enormous patient country that did not know any of them and did not need to. I think so too, he said. Above them the sky held its ancient, untroubled blue. A red-tailed hawk turned easy on the spring thermals, riding something invisible entirely at home in the open air. They rode until the ranch came up to meet them. Then they went inside.